I call this the practical guide to cybersecurity. And the reason I do that is because you hear a lot of marketing out there about, hey, go to the cloud, here are the benefits, right? But how do you actually do that? And why do you do that? What's the business conversation you have around that? Um, and what's the technical conversation you have around that? So there's a little bit of technical in here, and there's a lot of business conversation in here. I have a Who's Covenant deck. Who's Covenant? This comes out of Shell's slide deck in here. I talk about in this last bullet point on Covenant Global, I talk about DoD, CMMC, 2 and really that bullet point is to talk about how Covenant is focused on security. And both Covenant Tech and Covenant Global, we have a very security focus, very big security focus. And when you start looking at security from an internal perspective, what regulations are you regulated by? What frameworks are you regulated by? And whether you're HIPAA high tech or CMMC or PCI for credit card processing or your law enforcement or whatever it is, you're going to fall under some framework. And what Covenant recommends is to really start with these two. And CS18, which Microsoft has a very close relationship with the CIS group, and they've got really good documentation on how to securely implement CIS and the technical aspects of it with Microsoft 365. But this is where Covenant really steps in at, and we focus on these things because customers like Department of Defense subprime contractors have to meet NIST 800-171 or law enforcement 153. A lot of these overlap the requirements, and most all of them will map to 171. So we really focus on these security frameworks and how to implement them in a practical way that fit your business, but meet your regulatory requirements. A lot of organizations, when they start down the road of a cybersecurity program, you run into slides like this, where you've got establish a perimeter, modernize infrastructure and security, and build a foundation of trust. Or you've heard the term zero trust, which means assume you've been attacked, don't trust anyone. And when you move into cloud services where you're using a product like Microsoft 365 or using Azure services, there's this concept of responsibility models of who's responsible for what, and you need to clearly understand that because let's take a Microsoft 365 tenant as an example. When you get a new tenant, it's not configured for security. It's not even configured for management and best practices. It's just like Microsoft gives you this foundation to start with, which is really loose from a security perspective. And you would think the opposite, but it's very, very loose. So you have to really develop your own and understand where these boundaries are. We like to simplify it a little bit into these core areas. And it's identities, username and password, endpoints, the device you're using, the operating system that it's running, the applications, whether they're on premise or in the cloud, where your data is located, whether it's on premise in the cloud or in a database, and then all your infrastructure pieces, your hypervisors, your networking, your IoT devices, devices that have an operating system that still have to be updated. And those can be printers, they can be security cameras, they can be sensors, they can be door locks. All these types of things classify as IoT because they are connected and have, they're IP connected. They have an IP address associated with them. So you've got to look at all these things. And then the next thing you have to do is look at what the common threat vectors are for these particular things. And I'll start with a yellow block first because that's the more easy one. And this is where a lot of attacks occur is known vulnerabilities, meaning that you've got these devices or these systems, but they haven't been patched. And there's known security vulnerabilities out there that are very well documented and patches have been released. So you've got to keep those systems patched. And the other piece of it is access controls. Who has access to these systems? Are you using the same administrator password over all your PCs? Do your administrators have a regular user account and an administrator account? Are you, how are you managing your environment from an access control perspective? And then the identity side, these are the common things we see all the time. Weak passwords, or passwords that never change because the CEO doesn't like to change his password, right? It's an inconvenience. Shared admin accounts, like I was talking about, you got one admin account that everyone uses the domain administrator account to do work, but you really don't know who did it. And it's a common password that never changes. Service accounts really fall into that category too. And then no MFA. This happens all the time. And we all know that passwords are irrelevant and easily hackable. And if you have MFA enabled, it's going to block 99.9% of your identity attacks. It's just going to stop it because that's the extra human piece that you have to do. And, if you want to get hacked, just don't have MFA in your environment, and it'll happen. And we see it all the time. But the other aspect of that is from a leadership perspective, understanding or establishing for your business what are negotiable versus non-negotiable threat protections, those decisions in your environment. Meaning that what the negotiable things would be like things that as an organization you have a little bit of flexibility with, maybe. Okay. Non-negotiable would be things like strong passwords or multi-factor authentication. We don't care who you are. I don't care what your role is. You're going to have MFA. That's a non-negotiable. It's a business standard practice. You don't fall away from that. So it's not a personal choice, or it's not a topic of discussion. It is what it is. So as a business, you need to have those conversations internally, because your customers and the information that you're protecting, your customers expect you to be protecting their data. If you've got contact information, if you've got a CRM system, if you've got an accounting system, or you've got personal information system, personal identifiable information, healthcare information, employee records, whatever that is, your employees expect that to be protected. Your customers expect that to be protected. And if you get breached and you said, oh yeah, we didn't have MFA because it was inconvenient, that's not going to look good for your reputation, and it can really damage a business. So next step here is a couple of recent attacks that we've actually seen and helped customers through, not necessarily customers of ours prior to the event, but in one instance I will talk about that they were, but not a managed customer. But these are actual attack scenarios that we've seen where we've had to help customers get out of resolve from a ransomware attack. Typical environment, on-premise infrastructure, remote worker, Microsoft 365. Pretty straightforward. User gets an email, bad link, right? Because you don't have an email protection system in place that is actually looking at URLs, links before they deliver them to users, or looking at attachments before they deliver to them to users. So user gets something, bad document, bad link, clicks on it, opens it up, whatever it might be. And a little bot runs, or a little application runs in the background, and establishes a presence on a machine. And there are ways to establish on a presence on a machine that antivirus doesn't pick up. And having an advanced antivirus solution, it's important to have one that can actually detect different types of patterns of activity on a machine. But anyhow, let's establish a presence on the computer, and then starts looking at what that user has access to, and says, oh, great, you have access to files. Let me encrypt all of those that you have access to on your local network drive. Nice. Now users, it affects a whole bunch of people when that happens, obviously. But let's take it in the next step, and let's say the person's using OneDrive or Teams. Great. You got the OneDrive client installed in your machine. Hacker can see those files too. Let's encrypt those. Okay. Now those get encrypted. And then what happens with all of that for all those people that are synchronizing to a Microsoft team that just got encrypted? Well, all those files get encrypted to them too. And you can pass along ransomware easily through that route also. So that's one scenario that we've seen that is common. The other scenario is you got a remote worker, gets a bad email, same kind of scenario, but they're outside the office. Threat actor establishes a presence, but has access through the VPN to the entire infrastructure, right? And establishes a presence on an internal computer that maybe wasn't patched, or who knows what, right? Finds some vulnerability to get in. Then through time, and a lot of attackers will be in an environment for months at a time before they actually press the red button, as it were. they start finding all the admin accounts. They call it Kerber roasting. You find the admin accounts within your environment. You hash out what the passwords are, and you figure it all out. And then you say, okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to establish, that admin account on the environment. I'm going to take out your backups, because that's the first thing an attacker is going to take out, is going to fry your backups so you don't have the ability to recover. And then they're going to go after your hypervisor, and they're going to encrypt all those virtual disks and just take out your hypervisor, which means all of your servers are now down and you're out. You're done at that point. And we actually walked through this scenario with an accounting firm a little over a year ago. It'll be a year and a half ago. And this exact scenario is what happened to them. And it's ugly, because what happens in those types of scenarios, as a business, you cannot trust any machine in your environment that it was attached to the network into the office, VPN'd in, because you don't know where that threat actor established a presence at within your environment. You don't know what administrator passwords that they have access to that are in cached mode locally on the device that are still active, even though the device isn't connected into the network. So essentially, you have to shut the door on, close the lid, as it were, on all of your computers. Just turn them off, because you don't know which one it is. And they're now part of an investigation to determine where the threat actor is and what they've gotten to. And, what do you do at that point? Your business is done. And with this particular accounting firm, they were 3 days away from filing business taxes for their customers, and they had to shut everything down. And I'll talk about how we resolve that with them in a minute, but just be forewarned that it's a nasty thing when this type of a scenario happens. So how do companies protect themselves? This is what we typically see. Customers have everything under the sun from a software perspective. They pick kind of best of breed, I'll call it, solutions in various categories. But the problem is none of them are integrated. None of them talk to each other. If when an event has to occur, you have to go to this software and then that software and that software and figure out what the path was of how a threat actor got in and where they're at. And you have to make a decision from a business perspective on, do you pick best of breed, or do you pick best integrated solution? So when an event does occur, one, these systems can talk to each other and tell them what's going on. And two, from an investigation perspective, you can actually see how it occurred, right, and where they're at throughout the entire event. Microsoft does have a cybersecurity architecture framework, a reference framework. I'm not going to cover this. This is very technical and very in-depth. It's a hot mess, is what I like to call it. And it's very challenging to get through. But know that they have integrated solution, and that's their Defender products. Now, this is what they call the Defender across attack chain, which walks you kind of through a sample of how an attack gets through the environment. But the key I want to show you on this slide, I really want to talk about here, is the different Defender products that you'll see here. You've got Defender for Office 365, which is email protection, Defender for Endpoint, which is kind of your core. It is already installed on every Windows machine out there. And all you have to do is activate it with a little script, PowerShell script, essentially, just bring it to life. And it starts sending telemetry data back. And the telemetry data it sends back is core to that integrated solution and being able to talk to all of these other things. You've got Defender for Identity, which is identity protection, Azure Active Directory protection, Defender for Cloud Apps, which is a really cool solution. You've heard the term shadow IT, meaning users go off and do their own thing without the IT department of the business knowing about it. Well, this will tell you what those users are doing. If Heidi's watching Netflix at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we can actually see that. So there's a lot of things that you can get out of Defender for Cloud, and even preventing users from accessing those applications you don't want them to access. And then there's Defender for IoT, which is a whole other product conversation. The other thing that I'll mention here is, by default, Microsoft will keep about 30 days of log data. There's a couple of aspects where they'll keep it a little bit longer, but in general, it's 30 days of log data. So if you need to retain logs for longer than 30 days. And remember that threat actors are in your environment typically for months. Okay. So more than 30 days. You really need to bring in a solution like Azure Sentinel or Microsoft Sentinel that is a logging tool that will retain data for a longer period of time. It's an easy add. Microsoft actually doesn't charge you for connecting to that log data. They charge you for the processing of it. But there's some cost benefits to using Microsoft Sentinel as it integrates with 365 and it integrates with other third-party products. So if you want to bring your Cisco firewalls in here and collect syslog data, you can do that. They have a ton of data connectors which integrate with a lot of products. Sentinel One, Blackpoint Cyber, they integrate with third-party security products too. So you can bring it all into one place and have a longer log retention. So when an event does happen, because it will happen, you can have a longer period of time that you can do research on from an investigation perspective. Microsoft is cross-platform, so they're not just Microsoft. They're AWS, they're GCP, there's Salesforce, there's Honeywell. They work across everything. They're multi-cloud, so they work with multiple vendors. They're not just standing alone by themselves. And they've actually created the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association for this. These last two slides are a little bit older, but it gives you a glimpse of the partners they have in here. And you'll notice there's any other antivirus solutions in here like Sophos and Symantec and Webroot. And the reason this association exists is because Microsoft has the best telemetry data. They have billions of Windows PCs out there. They're collecting data on. And when an event occurs, they have the visibility to those events faster than anyone else. And they have the ability to resolve them faster than anyone else because, Defender for Endpoint is actually integrated into the kernel of the operating system. It's built in. It's a built-in component where all these other products are add-ons. But point being is all these organizations work together to protect businesses, and Microsoft being core to that because of the telemetry data that they have. Getting more out of your tech investments. Again, this is just kind of a highlight on integrated solutions. These are some of the basic customer needs that customers have from a security perspective. MFA, an EDR, XDR solution, device management, chat, Teams, productivity tools, single sign-on, those kind of things. If you start bolting these things on one at a time, it can add up quite a bit, especially if you're in the Google ecosystem. You're bolting on all kinds of products, and Microsoft sees that and is aware of that, and they build their product sets to be more integrated and a better price point. And you can get, like in this particular case with Defender for the business premium license, it's a very cost-effective solution to have a fully integrated product set that gives you all these things at a lower cost point overall, but it's all integrated on top of that. So look at the Microsoft product suites and see what they come with, because a lot of times you already have the product, but you're paying for something else and you just don't know it. So just be aware of that. The other thing is next steps is what do you do? How do you go on from here, right? With all this information. Well, the first thing from an IT perspective is take an inventory of the security systems you have and ask yourself, do they work with each other? Are they integrated? If an event were to occur, what am I going to have to do, right, to actually research an event? Take a look at that. And then also look at the tools that you already have in your 365 licensing. Are you utilizing those tools, right? It takes a little while to get comfortable with the whole thought process of Microsoft managing all of this, all your eggs in one basket, quote. But at the end of the day, they got good products. It took our team over a year before they got comfortable with it, but now that's all we do. And then get a security assessment. What's your current security posture today, right? How are you set up? It's amazing. Like I talked about earlier, Microsoft doesn't give you a secured tenant out of the gate. You have to go do that, which means you have to learn all these products and you have to know how to secure them. You just don't throw up a 365 tenant, migrate your email, and think you're good. You've got to really secure the whole thing. not only from a security perspective, but from a management perspective also. There's a lot of management components that go into it. And we've built a checklist around how to do this that's pretty comprehensive. And then, from a licensing perspective, business premium, M365 E3 plus security E5 or M365 E5 are the ones that we really recommend to customers. Business premium being the baseline, because that's where the first place you get security, and it's a really good value product if you're a small business or under a 300. And you get these things that popped up on the screen, Defender for endpoint and with content filtering and Defender for cloud and all these Defender products, which is a lot to learn and understand, but it just takes a little while to get there. But we come alongside and help organizations do this process. It's very, very common. The other thing I'll mention is add an Azure subscription for logging. There are certain pieces of log data that you can't retain or see, and I can think of a couple off my head that are important, like conditional access policies, and where you want to see who and a policy would affect before you actually apply it. And you need an Azure subscription for that. And we can talk you through that process. The other thing, practical IT thing, is enable shadow copies on a file and print server. When I was a CTO at a large healthcare company, we would have 1 to 3 ransomware attacks per quarter. And, we actually developed a security process and a systems in place for fast recovery, and volume shadow copies was an important aspect of that. Get cloud backup. Microsoft does not back up your data. They have recycle bins. You have 500 versions of files by default, but they don't back it up. Remember that scenario earlier? Your OneDrive gets encrypted, your Teams gets encrypted, and replicates it to everyone else. If you don't have a backup solution in place, it's going to be a long road to recovery, because you're going to have to go to every single file and restore the previous version of it. And when you got 1 million files in your environment, that takes a little while. Replicate your backups up to Azure. Get them out of there. Air gap them. Very simple, low cost. Is less than 2 cents a gig typically for this type of scenario. And most on-premise backup solutions have an Azure component built into them already. The second thing is add a domain controller up in Azure. Get an air-gapped hypervisor, meaning, like I talked about earlier, where your hypervisor can get attacked and take your entire environment down. With Azure, that can't happen. A threat actor won't have access to that environment. They could get access to the domain controller, but they're not going to encrypt it because they'd lose their presence. And it'd be really hard. So that accounting firm that I talked about, their saving grace was they had done a proof of concept with us for Azure Virtual Desktop. They had a site-to-site VPN, and they had a domain controller in Azure. They were completely down on premise. Their hypervisor was gone. Everything was encrypted. And that domain controller saved them because the hacker couldn't encrypt that. We had the machine looked at to make sure it was clean. A third party came in and validated it as part of the investigation. And within 4 days, we had them back up and running in Azure Virtual Desktop. Every employee had to go out and buy a new PC from Costco or Walmart or Best Buy or whatever, Sam's Club, and just get a device and get it connected. And we had them in AVD and off and running. And then the last one would be Azure Site Recovery Services. You can replicate your hypervisor off from on-prem to the cloud. And if an event does occur, you can press the red button, and in minutes, you can literally be standing servers back up. We have financial institutions that we work with that use Azure Site Recovery Services. And I think the last test where we failed over 50 servers over to another region, it took less than 25 minutes for them to be back up and running. So it's a great solution and something you should look at. The zero trust conversation that we talked about earlier, Microsoft has a framework for that. There's a lot of frameworks out there, but you can use the Microsoft one as an example. And if you're using third-party products, fine, just plug them into this model. They'll give you the guidance that you need, but it's all here for you. It's all laid out. There is a plan to take you through this, and we can help with that. And then look at your secure score. Where are you at today? Earlier I talked about identities, endpoints, applications, and data. Well, guess what? That's what the secure score focuses on. You have one today. If you've got a 365 tenant, look at it, see where you're at. The one on the right here is our secure score for Covenant Global. You'll notice identities and data are both 100%. Microsoft has changed. This is every month, so you'll see little fluctuations like on this little graph there. You'll see things going up and down because Microsoft changes the product every month, so you got to stay on top of it. But our device and apps is a little bit weaker because we have a BYOD policy. We allow employees to use their own devices, so we can't quite do everything that we really want to do. But mind you, we're at a pretty high number comparison to others out there, and that's where that comparison chart is down at the bottom. You can see how we compare to other organizations in similar size. A lot of reference information in here. The one I'll mention on here is the feature matrix. This is a license feature matrix developed by a Microsoft employee out of Australia or New Zealand, and he keeps a pretty good job of keeping this up to date. But it's a good, if you want to see product comparison, and it's important too because I've walked into customers that have 4,000 M365 E3 licenses and one P2. Well, you can't do that, right? There's certain things that are tenant-wide activations. You just have to be aware of it, and you don't want to get in trouble by Microsoft because that'd be a little big price tag that your CFO really probably wouldn't like. Next steps, get a security assessment. Find out where you're at today. We have a paid for security assessment that is, the 365 one alone is somewhere between 9 to 12 pages. And we look at how you manage your environment, how it's currently configured, and then we look at all the security aspects of it and give you a document with links to everything, give you high-level recommendations, where your risks are at, and then how you're configured and all the links and what you should change and why you should change it. It's a great great document to have and get a baseline of where you're at. We'll also look at Azure, your perimeter, and we can actually go on-premise and look at how you're managing and securing your on-premise system. We don't get into your applications and things like that. That's a whole nother game. But understanding your perimeter security is really, really important. We can help with security assessments on that. Licensing, right sizing, I mentioned that earlier. Where you're at from licensing. We have a tool called CSP Manage that can actually attach to your environment. It's a free service, free assessment that we do, and it can tell you where you have errors in your licensing, because there are multiple ways you can assign licenses to users, and we can identify those errors. And we'll also show you all the disabled accounts that are still licensed, and give you the ability to know which ones you can convert to shared mailboxes, which don't require a license. So we have a tool for that, and that tool is growing into a security aspect. So there's more to come on that, where it's going to start. You'll be able to have access to our checklist and a quick little security dashboard that shows you. Pull some of the Microsoft security information out so you can kind of see it in one place without having to go to the admin consoles. We have our secure process, which we talked about from a management and security perspective. We call it Fortify. And product implementation, you've got services that you may already be paying for, but you don't know how they work, and you don't know how to implement them, and you don't know what the user impact is going to be. That's where we come in. We can educate you on this, show you how to implement them in the right way the first time, and you'll learn a lot in the process. Cloud migrations, we all live in a hybrid world today. We still run across customers that are mostly on-premise, and having a good business continuity solution like I talked about, Azure Site Recovery Services, getting your backups to the cloud, putting a domain controller up there, those types of things that start walking you down that road and moving you in that direction. So you have some recovery capabilities, and you have more capability as an organization to be flexible and be able to respond quickly to change. Like if you're acquiring a company or something like that, or you've got aging hardware, let's talk about what that looks like and what that cost model is. And then ongoing management. Covenant has both fully managed and co-managed solutions. Fully managed is like, hey, we just manage everything. We're your support desk. We're managing your servers. We're managing the whole thing. We can take the whole thing on for you. Co-managed is, let's define the relationship. You don't want to get support calls, right? You don't want to manage a 24/7 knock. You want someone else to patch your Azure servers, or you want someone to manage your AVD environment. let's talk about what those things that you don't want to do that you'd rather hand off to someone else so you can move on to better things, or at least have the opportunity to take a vacation if you want to take a vacation, and knowing that someone's there backing you up and can help support your environment if you do take some time off. All of these things are ad hoc, a la carte, and we can work with you on anything, plus many other things that we haven't even covered here that are not necessarily security related or cloud related, but we can definitely help with other things. And one would be a good example of that would be organizations that have to comply to some regulation. There's the technical aspects of that, but there's also the business policies, procedures, and training side of the fence. We can help with that side too, because that's definitely a journey, especially if you're a business that is a Department of Defense subprime contractor that has to meet CMMC compliance here in the next year. That's a heavy lift, and you're going to need someone to walk alongside you in that process, and we can help with that both technically and on the business policy procedure sides of it too. So there you go.